Welcome to Directionally Correct, a People's podcast with Cole and Scott.
Today's guest, Kelsie Colley.
Thanks to our sponsors, Worklytics. Generate actionable insights from work data while protecting your privacy using workplace analytics with our partners, Worklytics.
My other thing is, like, in the airplane, like, I think it's rude as hell to lean your seat back. I don't think you get any sort of gain in comfort whatsoever. You just disturb the person behind you. Totally.
Yeah.
So, like, if I'm sitting in my seat and I see someone come in with the neck roll thing, like, oh no, I know I'm in for bad times, totally. But yeah, you get this kind of like gray area where you got the backpack plus the neck roll.
Well, because the backpack, as long as it fits under the seat in front, I feel like is a really like good practice to have. Now, if you have one of those backpacks and then you're like one of those jerks that has to put it up above, then you've completely negated the coolness of the backpack factor.
Well, okay, that's totally me, because this past week I only took a backpack to where was I? Boston, DC, wherever the hell I was. Little attendants were like, "Hey, you need to put your bag under your seat." Like, this is all I brought. Like, all these people that brought like 3 things of luggage, they're the terrible people. I'm gonna put my bag up top.
I love how in your stories, you're always the hero and never the villain, Scott.
Oh,
Like,
no, I was definitely being the villain. I was taking up space up top, but also don't care.
Well, Kelsie, thanks for joining us today. And
Hey guys.
I don't think you and Scott have met before, so well, hello.
Hi Scott, how are you?
Hey, Kelsie, sorry you had to hear this like terrible version of me. First thing.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm okay with it. I had to
Do you have any
travel.
hot opinions about traveling?
I do, yeah. Well, I had to travel with a poster, which I decided I'm never doing again. My adult life.
Yes.
And it's just awkward. People want to know what it is. Can you get it out? No, I'm not getting it out. Where do I put it on a plane? It's with the guitars. I was like, all right, this is. And I was in the front of the plane, so to go get my poster, I had to do excuse me when we landed all the way to the back where there was space to come back forward. It was rough. It was a rough look.
That sounds atrocious.
Yeah.
And the worst part, because I know from experience, is if you do take the poster out, getting it back in is nearly impossible to like without wrinkling it and all that. I mean, it's really difficult.
It is challenging. I think we took it down this year and just shoved it right through the top of like one of those trash cans with a small hole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are you gonna do with that poster? You're gonna frame it and like put it over your bed? Like, really?
Okay. To be fair, when you first do a poster, let's say, I don't know how old y'all are, when you're in graduate school or an undergrad and you get that first poster, you're like, I'm the coolest, I'm the smartest person. And now I'm like, I can't believe I have to print this thing out.
Well, so I want to come back to the traveling component, because we were talking about how people who use backpacks are the most, the best travelers out there, if they don't have any kind of wheels on their luggage or anything like that. But I think you're pretty into camping, Kelsie. So are you a backpack traveler, or like what's your go-to move?
This is exposing a lot about myself. I'm sort of a princess when it comes to traveling. Like if I'm gone for 2 days, I've got the world's biggest suitcase checked. I bring a bag. I've got my personal item. I'm terrible. I do the backpack thing. I do make it fit under the seat in front of me. But I'm a big person. I'm 6 foot. I've got long legs. So I'm already taking up so much space. I try to be mindful, but yeah, I bring a lot with me.
Do you do like the neck roll and like the big like jogging suit?
No neck roll, but I am pretty comfortable. I love airport culture. For me, it's like a free
Oh, yes.
Germs don't exist. I'm on the floor. It's disgusting. Drinking and eating at no cost. I'm like, I don't even know what money is anymore.
Oh, and people drinking at like 7 a.m. too. There's like no rules. It's international waters for sure, right?
Yeah. It's good. It's a refreshing place to be every once in a while.
So, okay, so you got this like princess traveler like sort of like orientation, but also backwoods, totally fine. Campfire.
Yeah, I love camping, man. It's like I'll do it as much as I can in the summer. Don't like to be cold, but the thing about it is I'm terrified of the dark. Like once it gets dark and we have to lay in the tent and it's quiet, I'm like white noise on my phone, white noise on my partner's phone. I'm up listening. Like I know where the flashlight is, where the bear mace is. I'm terrified the whole time. And I'm like, does this ever pass? And I look over, like my partner just laid down. She's mouth open, mouth breathing, snoring, asleep. And I'm terrified.
Oh, mouth breather.
I know, it's in a tent too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so is the fear factor, is it the bears? Like, what is it like that's making you scared?
Yeah, I think bears are a part of it, but gosh, aliens get me too, which is just like, and I don't even know if I believe like what happened to me, but I watched Signs way too young. Do you remember that
Yes.
movie?
Oh
Yeah.
my
yeah.
God. We are
Yeah.
the same person. I'm the same way. Keep going, please.
Yeah, well, it traumatized me. I was like afraid of like, it was terrible. So we were camping last summer and there's no phone service and there's 4 of us and there was a lunar eclipse. So we're like, this is pretty sick. Like, how cool is this? We're out here, we can see it. And it's kind of spooky. And then it gets dark and we're all, drinking a couple beers around the campfire. And I'm sitting across from 2 people and they're looking above my head, terrified. And I'm like, oh, what's behind me? Like there's something behind me in the sky. So we all turn around and there's like, so don't blow the surprise if you know it. There's a string of lights traveling in this like very unique pattern. Then they all disappear once they reach a certain point in the sky. And we had never seen it before. And people are shaking, like freaking out. And I was like, that's gotta be a satellite. I just said out loud, hey guys, that's a satellite. Like we're fine. We're not getting abducted. This isn't the end of everything. But I wasn't confident in that. And so I pretended like I was cool, calm, and collected. And then at the end of the night, when everyone was going to bed, I was like, hey, can we sleep in the car? Like, just in case. Like aliens couldn't get in the car. And then the next morning we got to service in this little podunk town. And I'm like, immediately, as soon as my phone would read anything, I'm Googling string of satellites. And I had never heard of Elon Musk's Starlink. Is that what it is?
Starlink, yeah.
Terrified us. Terrifying.
I do like the idea that aliens don't have the technology to open a car door. That is fascinating.
I was like, the Subaru is going to save my life.
Well, I feel like the thing that saves you by being in the car is the car won't fit into the little beam up hole where they're beaming you up. And so like it'll keep hitting the whole top and then you're like, all right, I guess we got to leave them because the car won't fit.
That's an interesting theory. I like that. That's what I'll think about next time I'm scared in camping.
Like from like an evolutionary standpoint, like the dark is scary, right? Nighttime is scary. As you mentioned, like bears, wolves, coyotes, hearing them howl out in the distance is like terrifying.
It really is. Yeah, I'm like not equipped for hand-to-hand combat by any means, right? So I had gotten like a weird dark tangent last summer about bear mace and I hyper fixated on it for like 3 weeks. I was reading about bear mace all day long. My partner was like, if you bring up bears one more time, I swear you're sleeping on the couch. I was like, okay. But we bring that with us now. It makes us feel a little safer.
Have you ever gotten attacked by or at least seen a bear?
No, like there's black bears in Colorado and there's not that many of them. But I was camping in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and did hear like a pack of wolves pretty late at night. And yeah.
See, bears are the most terrifying animal, and it's because they're faster than you, they can swim better than you, they can climb more than you can, and there's literally, if they want to get you, they're going to get you. There's nothing you can do. So, right. I mean, that, like, I don't even know if bear mace works. Does it work?
So there's like some really interesting scientific studies, and they're all like small sample size, right? Like anecdote stuff. But what's really interesting is that people tend to wait to spray it. They wait too long to spray.
Yeah.
And you need to meet the bear in the middle with the mace or the bear spray. And they can charge at you in under 2 seconds. So like by the time you're like, where's my bear mace? Can I take the safety off? Spray it. Typically they leave, but I mean, I don't know. I don't want to know.
You're not supposed to run either. Stand your ground with the bear.
Right. Yeah. They say use like
I thought you played dead. Aren't you supposed to play dead?
I think like protectively dead, like an active dead. Like
you do power poses. That's what we learned, right? A few years ago.
Don't do that, Scott. If you see a bear, no more power posing. No.
Yeah, Marcus Corday said that it doesn't work in the workplace, and I guess it doesn't work on bears either. Well, let me introduce you really quick, Kelsie. So Kelsie Colley, she is doing people research, future of work, and employee listening at Zoom. She has, in her professional career, has done research around data-driven decision-making, diversity, equity, inclusion, employee listening, people analytics, and management consulting. She holds a master's degree in IOPsych from Colorado State University and is currently in the final stages of wrapping up her PhD with her dissertation on emotional labor at work. So welcome, Kelsie, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, maybe we can start out by talking about some of what is the future of work, and like, is now the future? Is the future 20 years from now? Is it 6 months from now? Like, what are we talking about, and how does that play a role in kind of your day job?
Yeah, I gotta be honest, and I do share this, right? I was interviewing for a couple of roles that mentioned future of work, and I was just straight up, I don't like this term. I think I don't know what it means. I don't think anyone knows what it means. And so typically when I meet people and they want to do future of work stuff, I ask them, what topics are you thinking about when you think about future of work, right? So some people are like, robots taking over jobs. Other people think really specifically, I've run into a lot of people who focus primarily on where work is done. So office, remote, hybrid. I don't love the term, and I don't know what a better replacement might be, but I always try to talk about people. So like your talent, their preferences, their identities, the tools that you have at work. So your technology, if you're selling products and you're able to test those internally as well. And then the work itself. So you think about like task type, job roles, levels of interdependency. And those three areas are what I try to get people to think about dynamically.
I mean, like, the prediction is the name of the game, and like future of work is just a killer marketing term, right? To talk about how people work, where people work, all this sort of stuff. Like, what areas do you typically focus on when you think about these sort of terms?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to get people to move past just where we work and breaking down some of those myths about, being in the office.
It's so top of mind right now.
It really is. And it's scary for, I think, a lot of people, right? So if we think about pre-COVID, we didn't have as much remote work, right? But also the switch to whatever working was like during the pandemic was forced. You had to do it quickly. You didn't have time to do research and plan. Now we're at a spot where like we have the time to think carefully about this stuff and study it before we make choices about work arrangements and preferences. But I think really asking the questions about what are our assumptions we're making, and do we have internal evidence to suggest that that's true, right? So like people who are interested in increasing collaboration suggest that being in office is better. So I always ask, do we have, internal evidence to suggest that? That's so exciting. How did you learn that? And typically you'll find that people who are either higher in political power in the org or have been in the industry longer are more comfortable in the office. And so pushing on those myths and those assumptions is what I typically try to do in a friendly way, but I definitely have a point of friction.
Yeah. When I think about this, and you titled it very appropriately, they're more comfortable in the office. And what I mean by that is they're more likely to be a person who has an office, not a cube, not an open desk.
Yes.
And I bet you if you cut the data by people who can close their door versus people who don't have a door at all, that whether or not they want to go back is probably substantially different.
Yeah, and you think about it too, like if you're a senior leader or somebody with informal power, you go to the office, you're going to have a good day. People like to see you. They're going to come shake your hand.
Yep.
Very different for like a young professional who's never worked in an office, forced back. So challenging some of those assumptions is fun.
Or do these terrible arrangements where people are just like thrown into like one long table together, like with the idea that they're going to collaborate more just naturally. And the actual research shows that they just wind up putting their headphones in and messaging back and forth. Like they don't actually talk more.
Yeah, it's a good marketing tool for Bose headphones,
Yeah, actually, I wanted to share with you guys. I don't know if you've seen the speaker that has like geolocation sound input.
No, what does that mean?
I don't think my chief people officer yesterday showed me this. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing some of his secrets, but it's this speaker that goes above your computer. Looks like a big bar, and it's got your camera in the middle, but you could talk in the middle of your screen. And then by the time you step out of focus, it cuts off the audio from that location. And so like if your dog is barking in the room next to you, yes, but he's not in the camera, it cuts the sound. And I think that is like a really interesting way to work from home. But when you're in the office, it's not really an option. So if you're having a call next to somebody in these open, like modern offices, it's just not, I don't think it's super great for the goal of the office.
So that helps the people on the other end of the call, but it doesn't help you. Like I find it terribly uncomfortable to hold the call next to somebody else.
I would never do it at home when my partner
absolutely
like, shutting the door and
Yeah, I was
But
just
but
thinking, I was like, I like to continue talk when I go off screen. And so I feel like that's actually going to hinder me.
Do you wander around frequently when you're on a Zoom call or?
Yeah, when I'm not on like one that's being recorded, that's going to go out to the whole world. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
But Bose
Well,
headphones, another massive travel hack, definite necessity.
oh yeah, Bose headphones in the backpack. You're on point.
Yep.
One thing I wanted to kind of switch gears here though, Kelsie, because I feel like you did a really good job educating me recently on this, was this term. First of all, I feel like this term came out of nowhere. Maybe I've been living under a rock, but the term neurodiversity and what does it mean? And I know you've done some research in this space, so feel free to kind of reference that research, but what should people who are in the field of people analytics or IO psychology, what should they be thinking about in terms of neurodiversity? What is it? And how can companies, from like a DE&I lens, be thinking about neurodiversity from trying to win the war for talent?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have to break it to you. You have been living maybe under a rock for a little bit of your time. So this term, I think, really means a lot of things to different people. So like most social movements, civil rights movements, terminology is key for getting people involved. And even within this, I would say social movement beyond IO and people analytics, that people have strong opinions about what this term means and doesn't mean, right? So some folks think it's just, cognitive differences. Some people say you have to have a disability diagnosis to be neurodiverse or neurodivergent. And
Yeah.
others say, it's really any variation in the trait and experience. So ADHD, autism, and everything else. But it really came to light in like an academic sense in the late 1990s from Judy Singer. And since then, we've seen a big shift in the workplace science beyond what we would call a medical model. So, before we were saying, you need a diagnosis, something's wrong with you, and we need medicine or therapy to fix that, which is kind of sad if you think about it, right? Like we don't do that to other different identities in any way, or we shouldn't. And so when I meet with orgs or consult in this space or do the research, it's really differentiating between, this is a welcoming social movement in the workplace and not necessarily something where we want to reduce the traits or expressions of neurodivergent people. And that's typically where I start. And I think folks have a lot of questions about, how autistic are you? So I'm autistic, I have ADHD, and I share with people, I'm high masking. So to be successful at work, I know I need to fit in social situations. I need to be able to play the political game. That takes a lot more work for me than a typical person. And so when I hear people say, you don't seem that autistic, or you're not very high up on the spectrum, it's really reducing some of those, what we would call microaggressions, right? Or just folks who don't know the right language. We're really trying to not do this like high and low autism thing anymore. We're just trying to say there's different profiles, different characteristics. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one, and bringing that into measurement, right? So from an IO perspective, if you want to do group differences, it's kind of challenging.
And what do you mean when you say when you want to do group differences? What do you mean?
Yeah, so one, if you think about traditional diversity, equity, inclusion, most folks think of race and gender, right? And veterans or people with disabilities. What's really interesting about neurodiversity is neurodivergent folks interact with the world and perceive the world and sense the world differently. And that's a psychological difference, right? And we don't see those or expect there to be those with other demographic categories typically, right? Besides examples like cognitive ability having adverse impact. But with neurodiversity, if you want to look at group differences between those who identify and don't, you really might see it there when you have a validated measure, because we don't test measurement and variance in this space yet at all, really. So an example of this might be, this is where our research rests, is on assessment, right? One of the easiest, clearest measurement areas that IOs know about. And what we're seeing is that traditional validated measures of cognitive ability, of structured interviews, they have inequitable outcomes. And it's not because it's job-related information. It's because neurodivergent folks and people like me perceive structured interview questions differently. And then our responses to that, right, are different. And it's just really, really interesting to think about what this could mean for employee listening programs, selection, if you're auditing, the employee life cycle to see like a barriers analysis and promotions. I don't see it happening a lot. I don't know about you, if you've done, probably not, neurodiversity measurement and variance. Yeah.
No, but it makes total sense. Like structured interviews or just interviews in general, you're asked to come in and, talk about your previous skills, et cetera. But a large component of that is like your ability to communicate and do people like you. And if you are not, say, particularly social or perhaps you think differently, that could really hamper your ability to get a job, be employed, et cetera.
Well, like, let me get really practical for a second of like, one of the typical pieces of feedback you give someone to like say, hey, interview better is like, read the room, right? Well, that's probably a lot more challenging to a neurodiverse person than if you're just saying, hey, you're just like me. Well, maybe I'm not just like you. Maybe I don't know what that means. But I did want to get kind of into one of the research papers you sent over and how it relates to this kind of invariance and inequitable outcomes point about you. It was called Examining the Use of Game-Based Assessments for Hiring Autistic Job Seekers. So what do game-based assessments do that maybe traditional structured interviewing or cognitive ability or regular assessments don't do that could help mitigate some of these gaps?
Yeah, this is a really interesting research question that's still ongoing. One of the major components is something, Scott just mentioned. It reduces that social dynamic relationship between you and someone else, or you and something you're not familiar with. And what's really interesting, and outside of IO, through developmental psych, education, gamification is used quite a bit for coaching and training and understanding autistic people in general. So it's a good fit in that capacity as well. And what we've seen is that gamification reduces a lot of the self-monitoring or masking behaviors that people might need to do in other assessments. And it allows you to just focus on the task that is at hand. And it's fascinating. So what we found is that we had a pretty large sample of autistic candidates who were in college or recent grads, and then a general population group take 2 out of the 3 game-based assessments through HireVue. And what we found is that results are generally similar in a really good way. And so it's very promising to suggest that gamification, especially in cognitive ability or assessments, is a way to even the playing field and still predict important job information. I think what's really interesting is that gamification can also be applied in a lot of other settings besides, selection assessment, especially if you expand IO out of the traditional workplace into education, right? Gamification of assessments in the college level. It's fascinating to me how much of the barriers that we see in the workplace also exist in education, and reducing some of that barriers is really the goal here. So other areas that we consider are, personality traits in hiring are really not great for people with disabilities. And so combining a lot of these different streams of research into one area, I think IO really picked it up about 5 years ago, but it's heading in a good direction.
Well, why would that be the case? Why would personality traits not be great for people with disabilities in employment situation?
Yeah, it's just less predictive of their success. So it's just not predicting job performance in the same way.
It's like interaction effect kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just really interesting if you think about battery of selection assessments or some sort of hurdle programming, personality. If you had an interview that's face-to-face, personality with non-gamified cognitive ability. We haven't tested this, but I would assume that the inequity is not great right there. And it's scary to think about that, especially with the war on talent and this largely untapped talent pool. And so people have this assumption like, okay, now we want to start recruiting and retaining neurodivergent people. And we see the benefits of it, right? Because making a business case is awkward in general. But what we're trying to do, and what I'm trying to get, leaders to do, is assume you already have a team with neurodivergent people on it and start there, right? Like there's a good chance that 10 to 25% of your organization is neurodivergent, whether they have a formal diagnosis or not.
Well, I think that it's critical in the future. Like you go back to the future of work argument, that you have points of view from various people. Like you can't just have a groupthink sort of culture. You need various inputs. You need creative thinking, et cetera, to survive as an organization. Like any way to get in that diversity of thought. Typically we talk about in DEI typical context, male, female, various races, this sort of thing. But the true diversity of thought comes from your mental patterns, if you think about it.
Yeah, there's some really cool research on, and it makes sense to me. So I was diagnosed later in life, which is like not freaking super helpful for like my younger career self.
Like, oh, this is why all this was
Ah.
like this.
Yeah. And now I'm doing the me search, right? Which I think a lot of folks do, but it's interesting. So there's some cool research, and I can't cite it off the top of my head, on folks with ADHD being entrepreneurial, like really good at like this like big idea.
Yeah.
And I can see that in myself, right? So I love a job that is slightly risky, or in an industry that's slightly risky. And I did not realize that. Like I didn't articulate that until recently when I read this article. And it's because people with ADHD may be better at connecting all of these areas of the org in a creative way, and challenge some of those, previously held, this is just the way we do stuff. And
Exposure to various aspects, and therefore you can start connecting dots across them, right?
Yeah.
I'm very much in the school of thought of like the hidden superpowers of these kind of like neurodiverse conditions, and I love that thought, and I think, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, Kelsie, but I think that like you could really, it's not just so much about like reasonable accommodations for people with kind of hidden disabilities, but it's like hidden superpowers. Like, how are you leveraging this to get an outsized talent advantage for your organization?
Right. So I'm going to push back on one thing here, if that's okay, Cole.
I probably used the wrong word. I'm sorry. I don't know the right
Okay. No, I think that that's a really good point, right? So the two things that come to mind are like the superpower conversation is really important because it makes the business case for folks who think differently, right? Like they're really good at whatever, but it also pigeonholes a lot of these immature programs for neurodiversity hiring, because they're like, okay, we need a bunch of males who don't make eye contact to do all of our computer science. And
Oh, really?
you know what I mean? Like the stereotype of
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the nuances there are, the business case is kind of awkward to be like, hey, women with ADHD are really entrepreneurial. Like, look at, despite her ADHD, she's got the superpower. Imagine if we said that about any other identity group. So, wow, Cole, despite you being a white male, you're still so good at your job. Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to talk about stuff that way anymore.
How do you deal with that stigmatizing nature of that then? Like at one point you do want to bucket people. On the other hand, it's like, well, we don't want them to be negatively bucketed.
Right. And I think there is an appetite for people to treat people well generally. And the business case is strong. So folks are leaning in, but I think it's talking about, traits are higher and lower in these profiles of people. So even within ADHD, there are people who distribute or display their traits differently depending on the context, just like personality, right? And so it's complex and it's challenging. But Colley brought up something I wanted to circle back on, is are trying to challenge some of the use of the business case in general, and just try to, instead of making it like a special version of selection or recruitment and accommodation, really, it's just built in and ingrained, right? So I was on a call the other day with somebody who is building a big research program in this area. And they were saying, we got to accommodate these people. We got to accommodate. We got to build accommodations in. And there's a couple of things that are really challenging with accommodations in the workplace. And the research is pretty clear on this, right? Like people don't want to disclose all the time. And there's different levels of disclosure, and it's scary, right? Like it's just really scary to do. And I always do because, I don't know if I have like no self-preservation, but like even in the interview phase, I'm like, hi, thanks for having me. I'm autistic. Just so you know, if I have social differences, that it's a bit part of who I am. That's worked out well for me. But moving beyond this accommodation thought process is really just ingraining accessibility into everything, right? Like if your slide deck can't be read by everyone at the org, you shouldn't have to remake the slide deck for one person. It should be built in the system of making a slide deck to make it accessible, right? And it's
I think Michael Knott told us about that. That was something I wasn't even aware of when he was on the podcast a while back.
Yeah, and it's not that hard, right? Like just run it through a accessibility tool and add a descriptor of your image. Typically is an easy way to start. But just even some of the brightest people in the scientific space that walk into neurodiversity are taking it 2 steps back when they focus specifically on, the business case and accommodations. And so here I am trying to push for something a little bit more mature and something that'll help not just autistic candidates, but anybody who doesn't like to make eye contact or has a little bit of a social difference in the workplace.
We're treating people as people. I like it.
It shouldn't be this hard.
What a novel concept,
I
right?
know. Ugh.
Yeah. I think you told me, and I may be wrong about this, Kelsie, but that you're one of the few IOs or people analytics types that work at your organization. What is that like? And do you have any kind of learnings from being in that, environment of being the lone person? Well, like how do you cope, I guess?
Yeah, I'll start by saying I think it's really fun. I have always been in either startup organizations, either in tech or consulting, smaller groups, and now I'm at a tech company, which it feels like a startup, right? The quick nature and the speedy of innovation. I like it. So all the teams I've ever been on actually have been young or small. So I don't know any different, but I think why it's fun and what it feels like is because you feel valuable, right? And there's only two IOs. The context you can bring and your measurement skills and change management skills fit a lot of needs that may have not been there before.
It is fun when like you're one of the few research and development or like IOs in a company. You refer to as like the brain. You're looked upon like a wizard, and it must be fascinating because like everything is fresh, like everything is open to possibility. You can delve into selection and job analysis, culture, leadership, all these sort of aspects that, at a more mature company, those things are already taken. Or like you're just trying to like increase like the validity coefficient by 0.02 or something, which is like super draining, really.
It really is. Do you know the phrase, God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers or whatever that is?
No, I
I've
love it
never
though.
heard that.
Y'all are from Texas, aren't you? Isn't that like a Southern? No, okay.
Maybe.
So I like walk myself into these toughest battles and I really do like it. And so an example of this is I was on a small people analytics team and we were given access to the raw vendor employee listening data for the first time, right? And so I had a hunch that I haven't seen the tech report for this vendor, but it doesn't seem like it's my favorite or what I would do with what they're calling drivers or how they display the data. Get the raw data out, get some hands on their tech report, and the item loadings were like really small, like way too small I'm just not sure how people get away with this stuff. So I'm like, okay, let's rerun this with our own theoretical model, right? So you basically on a whiteboard we did, what do you think that the driver is for these different outcomes? Can we add some items to maybe like boost up some of the constructs we're looking at? Month or so
Nomenological validity. Yeah, let's go after it.
It was so fun. Yeah, it was really interesting. So you're creatively solving a problem. And we couldn't get rid of the vendor, right? But we could really leverage the tool at hand based on, EFA, CFA regression work. It was fascinating. And they didn't have that before. And so they were driving their action, spending millions of dollars to take action on some of these low drivers that had high impact. And I'm doing air quotes because they weren't. There was no significant relationship in terms of an effect size, or the directional relationship that they were proposing wasn't necessarily true. And so
Are you saying it wasn't directionally correct? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am. Wow, I didn't think I would be able to plug that in here, but I did. Yeah.
That's some
Sorry, I kind of stepped on that.
hot factor analysis talk there, man.
Yeah,
You're
I
getting
mean,
into
I love
it.
Yeah.
Get me all hot and bothered.
Factor loadings. Oh,
Oh,
rotations, Verimax.
Mm-hmm.
Well, y'all want to step into the confusion matrix?
I'm nervous, but I'm excited.
Oh, don't be nervous. This is all your opinion. It's all good. We haven't done like a rapid fire in a while. You game for that, Kelsie?
I'm in, yes.
How do you rate yourself on introspection?
What's my scale?
1 to excellent.
Oh, excellent. I would say frequency is very high. Definitely introspective, maybe to a fault. I don't know how efficient it is, but it's always there.
Same way. I'm very internally focused, always kind of like criticizing myself and this sort of thing. What about you, Cole?
Yeah, I'm like always like I'm very self-critical. I'm not very good at doing something about it. Like it's probably gonna stay the same, but I definitely think a lot about it.
High diagnosis, less action. I like it. Thoughts on grit or persistence? This has come up a few different times.
You're talking about
Yeah.
operationalization or personal?
Either.
Whatever you think.
I'll start with personal. It's such a weird compliment to tell someone that they're resilient. It's weird because you're like, all the bad things that have happened to you,
I
out
love
of all
it.
the crap that's
Yeah.
fallen in your head, you're still smiling. It's like, thanks.
Well, it
Well,
goes along with your quote, like, you know, the worst battles go to the best soldiers or whatever, right?
It is a weird math formula if you think about it. It's like you have to encounter adversity to get better. It's like, well, you know, your initial reaction is like, well, I don't want to encounter that adversity. So I don't know. It is a weird equation.
I saw a chart from, I think it was McKinsey, and I didn't read the report behind it, but on the x-axis was learning, and the y-axis was change or behaviors or something like that. And at the highest point in the scale was adaptation. So it was really about like, if you can't learn from something, which I think is what Cole is saying, is he doesn't apply, no transfer of the training maybe or reflection.
Getting psychoanalyzed here. Well done.
Yeah.
The most magnetic person that you know, who would that be?
Oh, interesting.
Mm.
I don't think I have a good answer off the top of my head either.
Are we all looking at the ceiling, or was it just Cole and I?
We're all neurodivergent in our own way, but it just has to be the same way. Look at the ceiling. Actually, I do know a couple people, like I won't mention them by name, but like we've had a couple on the podcast as well of just like, they're just like a draw to these people. Like, I don't know what they do exactly, but they got that like it factor to them.
You know what the kids are calling that these days?
Oh wait, I do know. Is this the, not drip? What is it? What is it?
Riz?
Riz. You got the Riz. Yes.
Yeah. Like the end of charisma, the Riz.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know who mine is. It was my old boss. He was chief people officer at my last company. I'm not gonna name his name, but it was this weird thing where every time I would get on a phone call with a stranger, they were like, "Oh, you work for so and so? I love them." And when you hear that like one time, it's like, okay, this is cool. When you hear it on every call, you're like, this is weird. Like, why does everybody know this person already? But I mean, incredibly charismatic person.
Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer. I think there's people I think of that if they started a cult, I might follow them, but
Yes.
We had done some work and it got published in HBR, different authors, but essentially they were showing that these people that make gigantic strides in the network, that they do like very simple things like making connections early, and before they actually need something, they go just like, oh, hey, Kelsie, nice to meet you. You're into camping. You hate bears. Go figure. You've seen aliens before. That's really interesting. So that when they do actually have a need later on, then go back to them, and there's already a personal relationship, and they get things done much easier.
I love that synopsis of Kelsie: seen aliens and loves bears.
That is, I'm not going to put that on my LinkedIn. Please don't put that in the.
Good. That's a tagline. That's a tagline. Definitely. Are you able to anticipate the needs of others?
I think so. I would say yes. Personally, yes. Professionally, sometimes things catch me off guard, like especially when it comes to information people want or insights they want from a analysis. So like put a deck together, think about the audience, think about their skills, what they're interested in, what their KPIs are, and then they'll ask me a silly question like, oh, this is really interesting, but have you ever considered like what people were wearing during the call, and would that predict performance? And it's like,
What?
So the questions they want answered. Yeah, right. Yeah. There was another one too that I was anticipating, like what they were interested in, what they wanted to hear, how they were going to apply it. And they wanted to look at something completely, in my opinion, not validated, like smiles or something in the office.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know how to break the news that that's not going to work for you, but
Yeah, I had this really weird revelation during the pandemic that I have the male version of like resty bitchy face or whatever it's called. I didn't know it until I had a video on myself all day, right? Because you don't get to see yourself at work. I'm like, oh, this is why everybody hates me. It's because like I have the worst face.
It's not my personality. It's not the way I work. It's just my face.
And so I smile so much more now that I'm on videos, but I'm not that I should have to do that. I just have a bad face. I don't know.
This works really well for me because my face will tell you what I'm thinking. And so like if you ask me to do something and it's a dumb question, my face will probably indicate that it's dumb. But over a video call like this, where you get instant feedback, I'm able to make sure that my face isn't rude or,
Yeah.
you know, my jaw's not on the floor.
Oh, I love these people that have no
Air 5.
filter. I love people that have no filter. It's just so great. Just like, oh gosh. Okay, final question. Say you're queued up in a line. Can you keep calm?
In a line?
Yeah.
I think, okay, so I've got two examples on the top of my mind. Waiting for a restroom at SIOP. I was like, what is happening? So confused. I was in a line for 15 minutes. Blew my mind.
Really?
Yeah, it was wild. I was like, are there
in Boston?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, is there full-on networking happening in there? What is happening?
It's the PSYOP party weren't told about.
I was thinking some stalls were getting destroyed or something, but you know, that was,
Post coffee. Post coffee.
I don't know how people do lines. I stay away from Six Flags and Disneyland and all that. I can't do it.
Oh, that's another level when just like the line's gonna be like an hour long or
Yeah.
greater.
Yeah. Are there children involved? What's the temperature?
Well, Kelsie, are you ready to join us in the nerdery?
I'm ready.
You don't sound ready.
I feel like this is one of my favorite segments on the show. You just never know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. So you want me to kick this off, Cole?
Yeah, kick us off with some MTurk stuff.
MTurk, okay. So MTurk is in trouble, which is like really unfortunate. This has been an absolutely fantastic tool for researchers to collect data for 10 plus years, but it's starting to show signs of data quality issues. So there's an article, an MTurk crisis, shifts in data quality and the impact on study results, which essentially shows that from 2015 to 2017, about 10% of MTurk cases were invalid, but that number's jumped from like 38 to 62% in 2018, 2019. And there's another study conducted in 2022 that showed of 529 MTurk responses, only 14 were actually human, which is 3%, which we'll call that not good. Say that's not good overall. I'll go ahead and say that. But this is also criticized because they didn't take precautions. But essentially, the study results essentially say that if you're going to use MTurk, use screening measures and validation questions to get your sample right.
I'm so glad this came out. I have never been a fan of MTurk, and it's finally there's proof. Like this is not Cole having his data-driven hat on here for a second. This is Cole being biased. But I was like, I hated it since day one. I'm like, finally, somebody confirmed my pre-existing belief that MTurk sucks.
Well, in 2014, there's all these studies came out saying it was great. Worked just as well as anything else. I use it for my dissertation.
I cite that paper in my dissertation because I use MTurk. And so, but you know, what sucks about that, so I'm thinking about, you know, access to good research or access to being a participant in the scientific community. It costs more money to use the screening stuff on MTurk, like to validate participants. And
does it?
Yeah, it costs more to do it. So if you're a low budget university or you've got a small grant or penalized for. But you know what? We launched my dissertation, and the next day I was like, my dissertation collection, we're doing it finally. I had 600 bots out of 1,000 the next day because I forgot to click the button. And I was like sad. And you could see too, because you get the IP address and it's like the other side of the world, not within my, you know, screening questions in the US. But I don't know. I don't know if
I was paying $2 per response, and it should have taken like 10 to 15 minutes for a response, and I got one back and it was like 12 seconds, and I was like, this is invalid, it's going to invalidate that. And I got a response back from like an angry user like, hey, what the hell, I'm sending you a thing and you're not going to send me my money. And I wrote back something snarky to the effect of like, it's taking me longer to write this email than you actually took answering my survey. Essentially, shove off, this sort of thing.
It's just an arms race between the cheaters and the hackers and the bots and trying to do good research. And I just don't like that equation, honestly.
What is it good for? I mean, like theory building or like collecting ideas? Like what could you actually use this for?
MTurk.
Yeah.
Here's my thought on MTurk. So I think it's hard to build organizational partnerships that want to share data, right? Like we know that, especially if you're a graduate student. I think MTurk is especially helpful for event sampling. If you can get people to sign up for daily meetings, right? That's a good way to like keep people involved. That, use all that screening stuff, have attention check questions. But if it's just a cross-sectional sample, it's hard to imagine that you couldn't snowball some other way, or it's a lower burden on an organization to do a cross-sectional, big burden to sign some folks up for 14 days every day, twice a day.
It's a good point. Do y'all have any like favorite like psychometric like lie questions? Like questions to screen out people? I used to see some like I ride a unicorn to work. I thought that was good.
That's pretty good.
All right.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but a few years ago I used a scale. It was something like completely unreasonable answers to questions or something. I'm messing up the name, but it's like I've never told a lie. It's like, okay, George Washington.
Yeah, right.
Come on.
I get paid by a leprechaun out of a pot of gold.
Scott, this is like really, my gears are turning now because I used really boring ones in my dissertation, like please select B for this question.
Yeah. Oh no, it's time to get creative.
I know. Next time. Do you ever use attention check at work? Do you use it with a org sample ever?
I don't do a whole lot of survey design anymore, but I used to. And we would have questions like I never speed. And we had like a whole like lie scale, and like if you like, I can't remember what the rules were, but if you like failed like 8 of 10 of them or something like that, then you're invalid or something like that.
And we just do checks for like if everybody put A for every answer or D for every answer and stuff like that too.
There's a R package that will handle all this sort of stuff, like response bias. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but
well, if we find it, we find it. Well, the next one we had was it's not really a paper, but it was just a good find from an IBM slide from 1979. And what the IBM slide said, a computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. And I feel like this is incredibly relevant in terms of all the generative AI stuff I'm seeing out there. Like, oh, the best use case is like, what if humans never made decisions ever again? It's like, well, that sounds like a terrible idea, but I love the logic behind this. And I didn't come to this conclusion myself, but it's very reasonable, which is if you can't be held accountable to something, if you don't have skin in the game, as like Nassim Taleb would say, or somebody like that, you can't be making management decisions. So I don't know. What do you all think about this in relation to I can't go 30 minutes on LinkedIn without seeing somebody come up with the next big, hey, we're going to automate decision-making in this regard.
That's the thing, right? Like everything is going to be automated. And like, if you're going to do that, it's going to be rules-based. If it's rules-based, there could be unintended consequences for anything you do, not to mention just like general errors that are made. I think we've all like sat behind a keyboard and like tried to recode stuff and like made mistakes, this sort of thing, which could definitely happen. But there's consequences for those people affected, especially if it's a selection or promotion or any other thing. And that affects people's lives in a substantial way. And as a programmer, you'd be like, well, I just point to the computer. And like, what are they going to do to it? Turn it off. But people are impacted.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where people analytics plays a role here in terms of ethics and governance. And I feel like it's gonna be so hard to enforce. Like, at what point are you done programming and the computer is now thinking? And I don't know, right? Like I have no idea. It's fascinating to me. I think I was looking at, some of the hacks for back to neurodiversity. Like a lot of this AI stuff is pretty helpful. So there's a really cool tool where you can tell this program what ingredients you have in the house, and it'll tell you what meals you can make. And that's really great for people with executive dysfunction or, challenging to cook. But in the workplace, I feel like, I don't know, I'm scared. I'm nervous.
But I don't feel like that's a decision. I feel like that's just giving people options. Somebody else that ultimately has to make the decision whether to cook or not. or what meal to provide. But I see a lot of these things where it takes human decision making completely out of it. And I mean, I really, if you just look forward, a few months or a few years, this is all going to come down to regulation and the legality of things, because you have to have someone you can sue, right?
Yeah.
And this is why that I think we discussed it maybe a month or two ago, the Workday lawsuit, where Workday's AI is being sued because as an employment agency, even though Workday's not an employment agency, because they need someone to sue when an AI is making decisions. And therefore you have to have some kind of accountability. You can't just say, oh, it's a black box. Oh, it's just our new chat GPT, make a decision AI. And that's not how the world works.
Yeah, I've been cautioned to get in writing what I think is a good or a bad idea. And so I do that now. Like if I think that whether it's AI or just something else we're building or a new process or policy, if I don't think it is great, or I think there's a better way to do it that could provide, better equity or adverse impact or all that stuff, I get it in writing. So if they come back looking for somebody, I can say, hey, I did advise against this, but this is an interesting idea. So have you ever looked at APA's publication, like who did what, how much, what authorship order you should do? Have you seen that sheet from APA before?
No, it's like a scorecard or something like that.
It's like a scorecard, yeah. So it's really interesting. It's like you get a certain amount of points for like, did you come up with the idea? Did you develop the idea? Did you write? And I'm wondering if there's an option for AI programming in the same capacity, like
hold engineers accountable. Like you had the idea to select people based on this algorithm.
yeah. Or like who fed the data or selected, external information to add into it. But
yeah, see, this is why I write everything alone or with one other person. It's not hard to decide.
Well, have y'all heard of what's it called? Code Whisperer, Code Interpreter? It's related to Chat GPT, OpenAI. They've essentially given Chat GPT tools now. So it's turned into a data scientist on its own. Like you can upload your own data set and say like, hey, find me patterns in like my Spotify playlist, or find me different issues in, the COVID reporting, all this sort of stuff. It is absolutely wild. Like Cole knows, like I kind of scoured Twitter for this sort of stuff constantly. It'll like take a data set and you can just be like, hey, find relationships and write me an APA style article on it, and it does it in like 12 seconds. It's freaking wild. We should all be really worried because this directly impacts us. But back to it. Now the computer has tools. Like no one's telling it what to do. You're getting the even further step away from a human programming it. It can go get its own tools, make its own decisions, correct its own errors. That's another like fascinating things. Like if it runs into an error, it'll try several different iterations until it gets it right, stumbles upon the right answer, and continue on. And of course, it takes like no time whatsoever. We're in for a wild time.
Well, and it's going to be really, really challenging for countries and governments and kind of the legal component I was saying a second ago to put regulations around this. I have a link to it. I haven't sent it to either of you guys, but I saw this document that came up earlier today. It was a leaked Google document from Simone Wilson's blog. And it says, and it's talking about Google, we have no moat when it comes to AI, but neither does OpenAI. And they published in there basically some internal communications at Google saying like all the ways that these LLMs have been built have been open sourced. And therefore all these companies all around the world and just like people in their garages, everywhere are building their own. And therefore, even if you try to stamp it out at OpenAI or at Google or whoever else is doing it, you're not going to be able to put that cat back in the bag at this point.
Absolutely not. It's called Code Interpreter, FYI.
Yeah.
But it takes its own tools, and we're kind of past the point of even we're behind the curve. I'll just put it that way, of like this sort of ethical considerations. We should have been doing this when this computers can never be held accountable in like 1978, whenever this came out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. I'm helping some people formulate thoughts around AI. Like, what do we believe? What do we think? What's now? What's later?
And we don't even know. We don't even know. I don't think with it. Hell, we started talking about ChatGPT like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
totally different orientation now.
Yeah, I think the danger is if people are excited to integrate it into everything, or that's what I'm seeing. And I think I saw a really good piece. I'll try to send it to y'all so you can link it. It's called something like AI is the new civil rights frontier.
Oh, wow.
And yeah.
In
and
what way?
mostly I think selection, but even
Okay.
promotions, or if you were to pull, like, let's say you and I, you're my direct manager, Scott, Cole and I are peers, and this video call is sort of transcribing and recording and then scoring me on like competencies of communication, leadership, whatever. And there's a promotion coming up. You then go look at the scores I got from the video, and you're like, wow, Kelsie, it's not you. You're not it. It's definitely Cole, because the scoring of the video says he's more competent as a leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going a totally different direction than that. I thought it was like you get 2 resumes. One is Kelsie and one's an AI. You're like, I don't know, should I hire the AI or should I hire Kelsie?
that is
and
scary. Yeah.
Well, we're not far away from that.
Exactly.
We're not far away from that, which kind of segues us into like the final sort of thing. Yeah, it's just a tweet by Ethan Mock, who we reference probably too frequently, but he's got some really great stuff, cutting edge stuff. So he uploaded his research paper in a chat GPT and asked it to act as a reviewer, essentially saying like, this is an academic paper, write a nitpicking review as reviewer number 1, write as reviewer number 2 to make sure that they get cited more, and a third one that like kind of agrees with it. And it does. And he says it provides fantastic feedback on things that he missed and different aspects that he could include in the paper. Wild stuff.
I love
Well, it shows how much time people put into their reviews in these journals too. Honestly, the second one was the funniest one, where it's like, I think you forgot to cite ChatGPT 2022 in this article. It's like, you brown noser trying to get your stuff out there cited.
Ugh. I mean, there's so many. This is so good for, I think I love it. Like, I will be using similar things in the future, because think about, you shoot for, if you're trying to publish, you might shoot for your favorite journal, like the best journal, JAP or something. And then you wait a while and get feedback from them and say, hey, at least I got some feedback.
Yeah.
We'll implement it and turn it in somewhere else. Now it's kind of like, you can maybe do this 2 or 3 times. And if you could get, decision-making information from JAP involved, you might know exactly what they're looking for, or that editor in particular.
That is a wonderful point, because that's one of my biggest issues with the publishing game. So like, you go out, you collect data, you run your analysis, you probably did some like funding on the front end just to get it, all this sort of stuff. You run the thing, you get the results, you write your paper, you send it to the journal of interest. They get back to you in several months. Revisions, that takes a few months, send it back to them, could be another couple months. You're 2 years beyond when you actually conducted the study.
Right.
It's all old at that point.
You think about the implications for conferences, right? By the time you're presenting at conferences, it's like, that's really not. I heard someone describe PSYOP as the most cutting edge workplace research out there. And I was thinking, this is a great place to learn about trends, cumulative evidence, think about maybe where we're going next, but it's definitely not like what's happening right now, typically, because of this process. But think, okay, I've got
what was happening last September when we hit submit, for the whatever the presentation was.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about like open science, like accessible, not behind a paywall. I think some of the criticisms there are like, it's not as rigorous of a review. You can submit your idea beforehand, but like this process at the beginning and end of an open science journal would be great, right? Like there's some.
Well, I don't think we've ever talked about this on the podcast before. What do you guys think about these preprint websites like the ARXIV? I don't know how you pronounce it, but like where people, they say like, hey, I submitted this to JAP. It's in 2 years worth of revisions, but here's the results today. Do you think that's a good practice, bad? I mean, I heard some people, I can't remember where I saw this, but they're basically saying this is the only place they go to anymore to see cutting edge science because the journals are all 2 years behind.
I'm glad you brought it up. I've never heard of this. I would love to learn more. I can't believe that like JAP or the other journals don't allow this, because they are like a publishing machine. They want to make money and just.
Yeah.
I don't think they could stop it.
Right, because they're not plagiarizing the whole piece, right? This is just like the results. Is that what you're saying?
It's just a preprint. You like essentially
Mm.
say, hey, here's what my paper's about.
So it's already gotcha. Okay, so it's already been approved, and it's a Collective Commons or whatever the
I think it's pretty
authorship is.
common in like the harder sciences,
Hmm.
like, chemistry, physics, cosmology, but I think it is making inroads into the softer sciences as well. And I think there's some like competitors too. This isn't the only one, but I'll put a link to the ARXIV.
I was just gonna say, it's really interesting to me that it's more accessible to people, but I also worry about them being able to translate it into what it actually means in context, right? It's not just taking it and run with it, but
Well, ChatGPT is going to be the new Malcolm Gladwell, who takes all the research and makes it accessible
Mhm.
for everyone else.
Synthesize everything down.
Absolutely.
Well,
But,
there is this argument with, like, say, doctors. So like they knew exactly what they knew when they graduated from med school, and there's so many research papers that come out, you just can't stay on top of it. We see this in IOPsych too. Like there's so much cool research going on, but you can't read that much, especially as a practitioner.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I still put sweet and low in my tea. I think it tastes amazing, even though it causes cancer.
Oh, I had no idea where you're going with that.
Yeah,
I was like, is this an analogy, is this a metaphor? What do we?
I think it like that finding came out in like the 80s. I'm like, it tastes good. Anyway, well, I think this is usually the time in which we completely run off the rails of the podcast. But
Mhm.
Kelsie, before I give you the final words, got any parting notes for Kelsie?
Kelly, this is a fantastic conversation. It's so nice to meet you. I hope to run into you at the line PsyOp bathroom at the next one in Chicago.
That would be a special moment. Thank you, Scott.
Yes, it would be very special.
I cannot stand waiting in line, so I will not see you there, Kelsie. But I have enjoyed this conversation quite a bit, and you're an amazing human being, and thanks for being here. But you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott and Kelsie Colley. Thanks for joining us, Kelsie.
Thanks, guys.
As always, all opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
You've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott.